Welcome back, everyone. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be reading Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which was published in 1985. And for this week, I want to provide you with some background information on Margaret Atwood, some of the basic plot structure of The Handmaid's Tale, and some of the work's major themes and features. So, Margaret Atwood is a contemporary Canadian author. She was born in 1939, and she's known for the versatility of her writing, as well as for her controversial explorations of contemporary social and moral issues. Now, when I say that she's versatile, I really mean it. She is a poet, she's a novelist, she writes short stories, she writes works for adults, she writes children's fiction, she's a dramatist, and she's also a cartoonist and an illustrator. And a lot of people have actually questioned whether Atwood identifies as a feminist or not. Her stories definitely deal with issues about women's rights and freedoms, but she oftentimes explored those in the context of sort of broader human rights. And Handmaid's Tale, like a lot of her other stories, really examines human constructs. By human constructs, I mean man made systems that we use to impose order, meaning, and definitions upon society. So, when we think about, let's say, US society, our constructs could be a couple of different things. There could be our city and our neighborhood plans, literally the architectural constructs that we as a society have made that, if you think about it, govern the way that we see the world, the way that we measure distance, the way that we think about interiors or think about issues of space. Another construct that we have are our governmental institutions, the way that we construct laws, the way that we, construct voter rights, the ways those have changed over time. And then the third construct that American societies deal with as well is our belief systems that we've created. And by this, I mean religion, but I also mean the beliefs that we now have in things like love and marriage. So, for example, who's allowed to get married? What should the basis of marriage be? What happens if marriage doesn't work out? Another belief system that we have that gets explored here is gender and sexuality. How many genders do we allow socially? What type of sexuality is allowed? What do we mean by consent? So these are all things that our society constructs as a way of ordering how it is that we live our lives. And we definitely see these social constructs examined in The Handmaid's Tale. So, The Handmaid's Tale is one of Atwood's more well known works. It's been published into numerous languages. It's been reprinted countless times since it was first published. And it's been made into movies and television shows since the mid 1980s, including the most recent series of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, which was first aired in 2017 and stars Elizabeth Moss. So even though this work was first published in 1985, it really bespeaks contemporary issues. In particular, it explores religious fundamentalism in American politics, and it also explores a world in which sexual politics and national politics have become completely intertwined. In other words, it represents a world in which the government consolidates its power through constricting women's rights, in particular, their ability to choose their own romantic partners and their ability to control their own reproduction. Now, this is a work of fiction, but it presents itself as a memoir by a woman named Offred, a handmaid in the nation of Gilead. And Gilead is meant to be the USA at some point in the future, after a theocratic totalitarian government completely redesigned society. In fact, this work is actually set in Boston on Harvard's campus. And it's told through the eyes of someone who's kind of betwixt and between. Offred grew up and came of age in the US as you and I would recognize it. She was then taken prisoner and retrained into Galadian society, and she now lives as the mistress of a high ranking commander of the Gileadian government. And the story recounts a society in which Gileadian politicians have remade the social order by a completely idiosyncratic reading of the Old Testament. And within this social order, women are barred from working, from having their own money, and even from reading and writing. And the society is further divided up women according to their reproductive and social function. So Offred is someone of childbearing age. She's already had a daughter, and so she's given as a concubine to a commander, and she's tasked with bearing a child with him because he and his wife can't have children. But she also lives in a household with other women. So she lives with some servants who are called Marthas, and she also lives with the commander's wife, Serena Joy. And her mother and other women who can't bear children have been deemed expendable by this government. And so they've been enslaved and sent to, far off colonies, either to grow food for Gilead or to clean up toxic waste. So, in addition to the creation of this new social order, Gileadian commanders have also renamed every aspect of this social order, starting with their women. So, Offred's name isn't a name at all, it's a designation of her ownership by a commander named Fred. Literally, her name means of Fred. And when she leaves, another concubine will take her place, and that concubine will be named of Offred. Similarly, if she goes to another commander's house, her name will change into of and whatever the commander's first name is. But other women have also been renamed according to their function. This includes a group called the Unwomen, who are women like Offred's mother, who have been sent to the colonies. There's a group called the Marthas, who are servants. There are the Econo wives, who are wives of working class men. There are the commander's wives, who are also wives, but wives of the political elite. And then there's the aunties. And the aunties are women who have been onboarded by the commanders to indoctrinate the handmaids and also to discipline any woman who steps out of line. So, as the aunties suggest, what's been created is a social system that's been designed by men, but it's one in which many women are complicit. And Gileadian commanders hold onto their power through the creation of a totalitarian state, where neighbors spy on neighbors and turn each other in, where anyone who behaves in unsanctioned ways, or honestly even speaks in unsanctioned ways, can be enslaved at a moment's notice. So the world that Offred describes might actually remind you of what you've read about Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. There's actually a reason for that. Almost every facet of this story was drawn from some kind of historical event or some type of historical practice. That is, some injustice that's been imposed on women, on homosexual men, men and women, I should say, or on political dissidents. Um, but even though this is a work that actually draws on history for a lot of its details, it's also very contemporary because it explores the horrifying implications of trends that we can see today in our own society and in our own politics. Now, this is a work that I will admit to you is very disturbing and it can be very difficult to read. There's scenes of violence, including scenes of sexual violence. And at every moment in the work, there's just this impending sense of danger because Offred exists in a society where speech isn't safe, and honestly, where just being alive is quite risky as well. Now, I don't want to emotionally, trigger you. I certainly don't want to emotionally scar you. Um, you know, I think that this work is important to read and would encourage you to read it in its entirety because I think it brings up really important topics for our consideration. And it really shows us the power of fiction to encourage us to think deeply about our own society, much as Le Guin would do, or much as Gilman has done as well. So, as you're reading this work, I want you to think about how it's been put together from a literary point of view. Here's some things to think about. This is a work that explores time. It switches frequently between past and present events. And as I mentioned, it's written around a series of frame narratives. So frame narratives is where someone tells a story and then they either interject another story or there's a story within a story. So, for example, in the Gothic story, they oftentimes rely on frame narratives where someone finds a manuscript and then the manuscript becomes the rest of the story. In addition to playing with time, this is also a work that pays a lot of attention to costumes and to setting, and in particular explores the way that costumes and space impact one's sense of identity and one's ability to kind of move around and understand the world. Um, in addition, this is a work that relies on parody, believe it or not, especially because Offred oftentimes turns over ideas or phrases in her mind. And ultimately, this is a work that exposes language, and that I want us to think about what it tells us about language. Because this is a work about memoir and about speech, but about speech and memoir as being completely untrustworthy. So, one thing to think about as you're reading is how does Offred suggest that language is no longer trustworthy? And then, what is the implications for the fact that we're reading a memoir that we believe to be truth that is told about a world in which language just doesn't really have a ton of meaning, where we really can't trust what people say to be what they mean. All right, please let me know if you have any questions. In addition, if you have concerns as you're reading this work, please feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to talk with you. And I look forward to talking with you if I don't hear from you via email on the discussion board.